Hello, my name is Alex Dyer. I'm the Canon in the Ordinary here for the Episcopal Church in Colorado, here with another Canon conversation. And I'm here with a familiar face, Dr. Patricia Lyons, and I'll allow her to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tricia Lyons, and I can't believe in October, I think it'll be a year since I was out there sharing Bishop Kim's first convention with all of you. What has happened since then? All the things have happened since then. So I live right here at Virginia Theological Seminary. I teach here at Virginia Seminary. I also work as a non-stipendiary priest at a small congregation a couple blocks away. And I am married to the professor of Christian formation and lifelong learning. So we're a kind of geeky seminary Jesus house, spending all the time together in this house, kicking off the seminary year. So lots going on.
Well, again, thank you for coming back and having a conversation. I kind of wanted to pick up a little bit where you left off in the sense of convention. I'm a little bit upset that you didn't see this pandemic coming and could have warned us about that, but I will let that go. But in light of kind of COVID and everything that's happened, you gave us a lot to chew on at convention. So would there be any follow-ups to that? Would there be things that you would emphasize maybe a little bit more kind of in light of COVID, realizing that COVID has kind of sped up a lot of things that you were talking about now? And it's like we've gone from 30 miles to at least 60 miles an hour. And where should we be spending, or where should congregational leaders be spending their time and energy in light of what you talked about?
Well, the first thing I would just say, being here at the seminary and being in touch with a lot of different kinds of folks, lay leaders and vestries and bishops, and I just have to just observe, step outside the church for a second and say, I get nervous at the pace, the manic, I'm all for experimentation and innovation and all the things that we talked about. And so many people in your diocese actually are already a study in innovation, and just because of the church in the West. And so you have it in the DNA of your diocese to be inclusive, to be multi-ethnic, to have within your church also a real spectrum of beliefs about Bible and sacrament and prayer and things like that. So you are already kind of mixing it all up and doing well in that sense. As you know, there's a lot of churches in the country that if we take the one pandemic of racial inequality and white supremacy, as you know, for a lot of congregations, that's just like a new thing. They're all in. They want to do all the right things right now, but just that whole kind of consciousness, because their churches aren't in multi-ethnic neighborhoods, even though they're in multi-ethnic neighborhoods, their church is not. So anyway, there's a lot that you were well positioned for everything about church to really be turned upside down. On the other hand, what can happen is that people who have gifts, remember, we know from a lot of research done on Episcopalians that really a disproportionate number of people, I've heard as much as 4 out of 5, I don't know that I think it's that high, of leaders in our denomination and in mainline denominations in general are individuals from alcoholic or addictive family systems. That doesn't mean that 60, 70, 80% of our people have an active addiction, but it does mean that is something about mainline Protestantism that has really drawn a certain kind of person who likes to fix things or likes to be around things that appear to be being fixed. And that's beautiful. I mean, there's something from Genesis forward about being co-creators with God, which includes problem solving. And we also have a positive view of what happened in the garden in some ways as Episcopalians and Anglicans, that we also believe that being expelled from the garden was also the beginning of culture making. You know, it's symbolized in that line where God says to the couple, name the animals. Like, I'll make them, you name them. You know, this symbolic line that says that we're going to be co-creators with God. But what makes me nervous, and I'm sure you see this as well, is it's like there's something about this pandemic that people feel like, you know, I will not on my watch will things fall apart. I can't control my kids' public school. I can't control the government or the CDC, but here's what I can do. And that is where I hear, and I talked about this a little bit at the convention, that's where I hear the giggling of screw tape.
Mm-hmm.
If you've read the Screw Tape Letters, you're anyone listening to this, C.S. Lewis's great fiction story, a group of letters of the devil teaching a junior devil how to drag down believers in Jesus, how to take away their, how to be a dementor, kind of, to take away their joy and their peace and their love and their redemption. And that all the Screw Tape Letters, 30 or so letters, are just one example after the other of the way Satan wins or love loses is when some distraction can be put in the way of someone. And I can't help thinking that the exhaustion of our leaders, this idea that that it's on you, or it's on your vestry, or it's on your congregation, and we lose our imagination in that kind of stress. The cortisol goes up, the adrenaline goes, and it's chemical. And you stop thinking about, you were thinking about, talking to that other church in the diocese, you have these ideas about maybe partnering on an idea and maybe, sharing some responsibility and getting some capacity from somewhere else besides your, and all of a sudden right now you're like, no, COVID, that all those kind of interesting things, we're not gonna do any of that. We're just trying to figure out how to get Zoom working, or do we make a premiere on Facebook, and what even is that? And something starts to happen that we are overly responsible for what we can't be responsible for. Remember, our denomination, like I said, is a magnet for fixers or people who like to witness fixing. So we start trying to fix, and I get nervous. I get nervous for all of you, for the exhaustion level, because when exhaustion goes up, there's an inverse relationship between exhaustion and imagination.
I've talked a little, about just the previous thing before of adrenaline. And I think, I've been talking to some congregational leaders out there too. And, as this has set in before, the conversations have dramatically changed from June to July to August. Because, we had a fast here or in a fast for communion, started March 17th.
Wow, yeah.
And Bishop Kim had no idea that it was going to last this long when it started. And I think it's true for a lot of us in our practices. There were congregations out there calling people every week and doing some really unsustainable practices, at least for a small group of people. And now we're trying to settle in and do a little bit about that. An analogy that I heard from Katie Pearson, she heard from a friend, she's a canon at our cathedral, I think is really apropos, and I'd like to kind of bring it into our conversation. Along those lines, she said, we often use the metaphor of a sprint versus a marathon. This is not going to be a sprint, this is going to be a marathon. Mm-hmm. A more helpful metaphor she raised up, and I'm really kind of latch on to as well too. It's not sprint metaphor, it's more blizzard versus ice age. In the sense of, both after a sprint, you're tired. After a marathon, you're a little bit more tired. I wouldn't know, I've never run a marathon, but they say you're a little bit more tired after that, I can imagine. But a blizzard has certain effects after it, the snow melts, but an ice age is a profound shift in that too. So, given light of that, what do you think when the ice age thaws, right, as a part of this, what are some of the things you think that are going to stick from this pandemic that we've learned practices over and over, kind of continuing on, and what do you think we should probably not be investing in?
Yeah, I know one of the people who trained me to do marriage prep as an ordained person said that the kind of holy grail, one of the things you might want to get from the couple, one, to find out if you feel comfortable that this couple is ready to take vows, is to ask them how the last 18 months, if they've been together that long, hopefully, have gone, and help them. The greatest gift you can give them when you're not a therapist, I mean, that's not your job, as in marriage prep. It's your job to know if someone needs a therapist, and what kind. So, you're much more of a kind of a midwife than you are, the adoptive parent in the situation. But it was great advice to find out as much as I could about the last 18 months. Because research shows that really the first 18 months of a relationship pretty much sets, barring any serious, either wonderful or horrible event, both the metabolism and the meaning structure of the relationship for life.
Mm.
So you really want to find out as much about that as you can and help them understand, and have them see that really that there's something about sort of a year and a half together that you really are silly to think that when you get married next week or something, that things are going to change, that's more than a season of holidays. It's not a year and a half. And it's just been really good advice. And of course, there's always exceptions. But when I'm thinking about this pandemic, that we actually may, in the end, if we get a vaccine, let's say it could be around 18 months. And I've sort of had that in my head, that this could wind up being a year and a half situation, if you believe Anthony Fauci and other people like that. So what does that mean? That means that we're not just getting through this, or getting through it well, with some idea that when it's over, that we're going to then either go back to what we were or start something new, that both of those are sort of equally naive to just the physics of the way you set a metabolism. Mm-hmm. You think of eating habits or workout habits. I mean, if you do something for 18 months, if it's a good habit, it's probably going to stick with you unless you really break some kind of a habit intentionally. Likewise, if you set up a bad habit, if you smoke for 18 straight months, mm-hmm. let's just admit it's going to be really hard on 18 months and one day to stop that. So that's one of the reasons I get concerned about the exhaustion level. Like you said, some of the unsustainable, rectors that say, I'm going to write a handwritten letter to every member of my congregation. Mm-hmm. And if you feel called to do that, that's fine. But of course, the problem with most people, especially those who are either from or are living currently now in an addictive family system, there's nothing wrong with writing a letter to every member of your congregation, even if you have 2,000. But then something else has to come off your plate. See, that's what a lot of people are not doing right now. We're adding things that are important and God, Spirit-led things that I do think people should do that they haven't done before. Mm-hmm. But what are you going to let go, right? And that's one of the greatest things I've ever heard at the end of a retreat. The retreat leader said, most people, you go home and retreat with a couple of things you want to do, this new habit, I'm going to pray the daily office, something like that. And this retreat leader, we spent the whole last session figuring out what we were going to stop doing when we got home, which thing. And the retreat leader said that they felt it was their job to help us create that space, that in that space, the Holy Spirit would do something amazing in our lives in the next few months and year. And I've never had a retreat end like that. It just said there's not a single thing, but you broke up into groups. You had to go for a walk. There was a drawing. I mean, all the activities were aimed at discerning what that you're currently doing is going to stop. And then
are you telling me that energy and time are finite resources?
I know. See, Screw Tape gets mad when we actually think like that. But that there's something about carving out that space. But I just want to be honest with you, my friend, is that it is hard if you're a person with gifts of pastoral care. Yeah. To not respond with everything you have. That's why we really need each other. Like if you all don't have a clergy group, that you have a kind of a clergy group that's like a chatty group or something, and you need to get a different group of friends right now, because we need people to hold us. We can't do it alone. Screw Tape just says, go upstairs and go sort this out on your own. Have a little list on it, post it and put it up in the kitchen. Do it alone. Because remember, Judas was a lone wolf. I mean, we know what being a lone wolf looks like, and even if you have a lot of faith and you believe Jesus is the Son of God, you can still get lost. So you need buddies who can call you out and just say, you know what, we have got to find a way to, and this would be my main message. If I came out right now and spoke to your whole diocese right now, a plenary talk would be that what I see happening around the church, and being here at the seminary, I am seeing some of the best church I've ever seen being done right now by people who have figured out what is essential. Mm-hmm. What was the silent auction for? What was the grill and chill summer Wednesday night hamburger and hot dog thing we can't do anymore? But what was that for? Those things haven't changed. So come back to saying, what were the essential things that the Spirit was calling us to address, that we then started a preschool, which we're not using right now, which we then started contemporary service on Sunday night, where we could, hug each other and cook together in the kitchen of the church, which we can't do anymore. So let's just deal with the grief And grief is huge. And any people who aren't reading about grief or talking about grief, I don't know what world you're in, because the Holy Spirit is calling all of us in the church to address the grief with resurrection. The grief about the political culture we're in, the grief about the virus, the grief about white supremacy, the grief of people of color who have been bearing the weight of the obscenity of that alone in communities, while we stood right next to them and shared our hymnal and wanted to know why they weren't singing along as happily as we were, and generations of people of color have had to stand there and see us say that we love God and profess the creed and maybe hug them at the passing of the peace and say nothing about yesterday someone who looks like them and not me being beaten by a police officer, saying nothing except, do you want to go to coffee hour together? So they've been bearing that. So the grief that is just pouring through the streets right now is a call to the church to pour out listeners. So it's not just a call to extroverts, which often ministry feels like. It's a call to anyone who can listen and say, there's grieving in the church. We have to help grieve in the world. And what it means to be church is to do that. But we have to, for sustainability and to leave room for the Holy Spirit to actually give us some suggestions every couple of days, we've got to carve out some space. So there's got to be Sabbath, and there's got to be some serious pruning. Jesus talks a lot about that in the gospel. Yeah. Sometimes we get all excited and upset because he takes the pile of what he pruned and he burns it, and we're more upset that he burns it or calls it Gehenna or hell or something like that. And we have a whole year-long debate about what he does with the thing he's pruning. We forget the lesson.
Yeah.
You're talking about pruning. Let's forget how we recycle whatever's left or what God recycles with it, and just say, what are we cutting back on? Because we got to make space for writing the notes, for listening to the grief.
Well, I think in reprioritizing, we're trying to do a little bit of that in the Episcopal Church in Colorado here, to even to take the example of doing our diocesan convention. You know, I may get in trouble for saying this too, but God bless the diocese.
It's just us. It's just us.
Okay. Nobody listening. The other dioceses who are doing 6-hour days on Zoom, and trying to take that old model and put it into to a new model. So really kind of looking and prioritizing what is essential. We did, I think, a very innovative clergy retreat here, but trying to pare down to what is the bare essential. And I think that's I love your imaging of pruning and raising that up in the sense of looking, what does need to be pruned, lamenting the loss of what was. And I think that the tricky part about that is we had more time to grieve as things were coming on before this. We weren't doing a great job at it, I would argue, even before this. We're not very good at.
But we're fixers. I mean, fixers don't grieve, right?
We don't. We just keep on kind of barreling down and keep our head forward and keep going, and we can figure it out. But the idea of kind of letting go of that lamenting and really doing that, it's going to be tough for us, but I think it is the work we are called to do and spend our time and energy around there.
And amen for you. The research is being done concurrent to what we're doing, but there is research already about Zoom, or FaceTime or the screen time, and I'm at a seminary, and we are constantly both trying to teach online and also get as much information as we can about what we're learning about learning online. And what is very clear is that the people who are having the most abundant life experiences, which is what Jesus calls us to, are the people who are, like you say, doing a little bit of the creative, which you might call flipping the classroom, which is to say, finding things for people to do off Zoom. Yep. A lot of churches, are doing this, that they send stuff at home, like a retreat in a box. And then the Zoom, the flipping the classroom means give people the content, right? In other ways, give people a path to go for a walk in their neighborhood with some questions. So they have a real 3D experience in God's world. And then the Zoom meeting or the gathering or the coffee hour, whatever you call it, that's where people show up, see each other's faces, and the experiences they had, that's what they are talking about, as opposed to thinking, I'm just going to put our meeting or retreat or vestry on Zoom, and then we're all then encountering the meeting, the content, the business, and then we go off alone to do the processing. And the truth is, you really want to flip that. What would it look like to send all the content of a vestry meeting out beforehand, not the outline, like to what's going to happen. Literally, have people, write their responses and have as much of the vestry meeting out off the meeting. So people can go for a walk while they read what someone else said about the meeting, or have some funny thing they have to do, like everyone has to make a loaf of bread or something that is culturally and economically an ask that you can make, or you send out a pre-printed puzzle of the face of someone in the vestry, the whole vestry. They take your vestry picture from and just cut it. You know, you can print these things out, and you go home and you have to cut up a 30-piece puzzle. And while they're putting the puzzle together, they have to, you know, answer the vestry question. Different ways that you have these words. And then again, when you come together to do what you do. The beauty of and the gift of God of FaceTime and screen time, which is that you have some in a process. But we have way too many people who are trying to do the processing and the content in the Zoom meeting. And that's the fatigue, because we're not meant to do that. And when I see your face, I want to hear about you, Alex, and I want to talk about me, even though we're in a vestry meeting. But once we've made it two-dimensional and then we have to do the work of the meeting, it's like looking at you and ignoring you for 6 hours. And thank God we're wired that is going to fatigue our soul, because we're not wired to do that. So we need to figure out content delivery that is true to our Anglican, here's a big phrase, right? Theological anthropology. That is to say, we need to figure out how to do a Zoom meeting according to what we believe a human being really likes and who a human being really is. And this doing the content is just, it's a killer. And it's why you lay down at night and just put your head down. Like, I can't do Zoom anymore. I just can't even.
It's such a profound shift to kind of do and think that way. There's the new models of that. Because I think, we were, just to the mindset of this kind of attractional model of church, and everyone comes to the building, we were, sure, we would lament the fact of, 5 people showed up to my thing, and also stuff, you did your kind of spiel on that. Won't go down that road, but it's the idea of how to think differently in the habits that we're doing. I mean, it's this profound shift. We're going to get used to being more on Zoom. We're going to be used to that too. We're going to use, to be the place. I would believe Carrie Newhoff in this article, in the sense that we're going to be digital churches with physical locations.
Exactly.
So,
and people need to realize, like, this is where God, we need the Holy Spirit to help us. I mean, prayer, we'll just go without saying in this conversation, has just, my prayer life has been reignited in this. And I didn't think that was like a weak area. It's not that I was a superhero at it. We all know the superheroes at it. And, but it has been increased, because I just find myself really not knowing. Imagine if we're all walking on water, like Jesus said we could do. Each step you're going to have to just figure out, where is God and where am I? And but to go with God like that, and I think we're going to make our way over the water. But there is this part of me that feels like someone will say, we used to have 120 ASA, average Sunday attendance. And I've only got like 15 people coming to our Zoom church on Sunday. But this is what God is inviting us to do. For all of that person knows, that 150 were there because they didn't like people who didn't look like them. And church was their favorite place, because it let them go and be safe and not grow and not love their neighbor. And you don't want to say this to a leader's face, because you don't want to get them too depressed. But for all they know, every one of those people needed to have a radical change of what their relationship was to church, to just put a halt to some of the worst white supremacy, just being an example, but clericalism or sexism. And for all you know, those 14 people who are meeting you on Zoom on Sunday morning now, that feels like a decimated parish, is an absolute Pentecost in your community, maybe for the first time in 50 years, that you have 15 people who show up saying, "Open, Lord, our lips, and our mouth shall proclaim your praise." And you're having the most authentic worship, but you didn't know. So we need to just stop grieving the old numbers, because we don't know what was going on then. We don't. We can think we do. We can trust God, and it's not that I'm assuming that it wasn't good. I'm just saying that this is a time for us to say, who is God bringing right now? Because we don't have our usual channels. So people really are just showing up, literally like God just putting Moses in a basket and it just floating up into our backyard. And we just need to trust that and live into that and say, you know what if all of future begins right now? We need to think more about the past in terms of reconciliation and reparation. That's the kind of the past we don't like to think about. And the kind of the past that we get obsessed about is numbers and success. So I feel like the Holy Spirit wants us to get really curious about things that have come before that we haven't wanted to think about, and to stop thinking about stupid metrics that we put meaning into them.
Yeah.
I would so much prefer to sit with 14 people online and just to know that they had to buy a device or they had to learn Zoom or they had to figure out how to unmute just to even be there. And to know that when you ask for the prayers of the people, all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, that was like the most heartfelt prayers. I've heard some of the most heartfelt prayers I've heard in my life on Zoom in a chat box or something like that. And I just feel like Screw Tape is screaming in pain
Yes.
at the depth of that intimacy, and the Holy Spirit and the heavenly hosts are singing. So we can't sing now, but I feel like I'm hearing more of the angels sing than I ever have in these miraculous moments. So let's not just think of this as a time where we're also fasting from choirs. Think of the sound of angels at a church brought to its knees by its own doing, whether it's racism or the degradation of creation that brings about pandemics in the first place. We're on our knees because we knocked ourselves there. But the idea that the saints that surround us are singing us through this. But you've got to calm down. You've got to slow down to hear the heavenly chorus, to remember that the music that we love now is a hint. It is a symbol of the music that is going now, sung by the saints. And this is a time where we can hear it. And I can't wait, by the way, till we come back and sing together. But I do know that in this time, Satan wants us to think that we are fasting from singing, because then we'll forget the sound that is all around us right now. And we'll die without it. I mean, we're born for the love and the sound of the saints. So if we get into this rut that we think that we're in a fast from that, I just think, again, that's a Satan wins.
Yeah, or a fast from receiving communion, and as Mark Hollingworth kind of said too. But we're not worried about achieving communion, or or that churches are closed. Right? Churches aren't closed, not by any that we have been deployed out is where we are, and our physical buildings are no longer a place where we can gather together. But if we think even for a moment that church is closed. Yeah, I'm with you too. I think that's the voice of Scrooge.
And it's the imagination. I mean, that, and this is the last thing I'll say, because everyone's got to get off our call here and get on to their next Zoom meeting. But I will just say that the imagination is a gift of God. And I say that because we need to, if there's a story that you read that fires you up, go find it and reread it. If there's movies, I've been like crushing classic Star Wars movies lately. I need John Williams music. I need lightsabers. Like I know, because like in the food pyramid in my imagination, I know what feeds it. And there's enough fasting going on in other things. I'm not going to fast from the things that feed my imagination, because we have to have a sense. And it's funny that I'm sitting at a desk right now. This is where I'm teaching right now. And I'll close with this. I'm going to give you a little visual aid. How about that? Right here. So when you get up tomorrow morning, this is like something you can think to get your imagination just fired up, like a renewal of baptismal vows for your imagination. On my desk here, I have this bag, and that I just used for a class. And if you don't know what this is a chess set. This is a clock. Growing up, I was a tournament chess player, right? So if you play tournament chess, you recognize this particular set and this particular board. But what I have said to my students is a lot of people think about ministry, their baptismal ministry, as playing a game like chess. That you get up in the morning and you are playing this game. You have an opponent and you want to get better. You want to learn moves. You come to seminary to get better at the game. You get a clergy group because you want to get better at the game. You get a good speaker for your convention because you want to get better at the game. But this is a terrible analogy for where we are, especially now in COVID. Because this analogy is based on there are a certain number of pieces in here, and there are certain rules. Those don't change in chess. That's what makes it a fun game to play, because the rules don't change every day. The rules are the same. You really are just learning different moves, different ways to win. That's why for many people, this was church before COVID. And you spent your whole professional life as a lay ordained person learning new moves to win. And not even to like beat your opponent. You don't have to be a jerk about it. But the goal was winning. There was a confrontation and you learned more and more moves. You kind of mastered the game. The reason this doesn't work at all right now is because, one, there is no opponent in the world. It's Christ who has won victory. There was a war and it was fought and it was won, and death has lost its sting. So as we drag ourselves into combat with the virus, with church decline, we're like resuscitating the war as opposed to, engaging the resurrected Christ. And also, there are no rules to the COVID situation. So everything we know about church that we spent years and years and years, what we're now realizing is we've mastered how to fill rooms with people who share not just beliefs, frankly, but often race and culture and norms. We got really good at that game, and we knew what the rules are because we made them. And again, there's a sense of, I don't want to lose. So it's a win-lose proposition, which we know from Stephen Covey decades ago. It's just not a way to think creatively. But anyway, what I said in my class is, this is another bag I have in my room. And this is a bag of Legos. And the nice thing about Legos is there's no rules for Legos. The goal is just to have pieces. These are your tools. You can make anything on any given day with them. You can meet someone in the world, and if they have Lego pieces, you can join together. You can make rules. The goal is to build something. It's not to win. Or as Freud or Darwin taught us, quite often the goal is not to lose, right? To seek pleasure and avoid pain. That's the unbaptized life. We're saved from that. So to think of yourself when you get up tomorrow morning, don't wake up wanting to play chess better. This game of what we did with church, a church that owned slaves, and the Episcopal Church, one of the only denominations in the country that actually bought its own slaves to give rectors, to have as part of their rectories. So that's us, okay? So that's the game. So we have to stop that. We instead wake up and say, what's essential? Prayer, fasting, almsgiving, listening, spiritual gifts, and trust that on any given day, God is going to ask us to take what we've been given and to make something new. The only rule is the rule of life, the way of love, right? Those 7 practices. That's the rules of this game. Okay, not how many pieces and how you win or lose. So following that rule of life as a diocese, you guys were doing that. You were like all over the way of love before it was cool. So keep that up. But think of our lives instead of trying to get better at what was, because it's gone. As you know, when we go back to church, we can't even talk about going back. The role of institutions, the role of physical plants, our funding structures, most of it was broken already, and the accelerant of COVID and an awareness of structural racism, that game is over. We had some grand masters at church. So you know what? You just need to just put that in your back of your mind and just say, what God is calling us now is to say, there is a 3-year-old who is just as good with this piece as someone who's 93. Yeah. We're at a time now where we need creativity, we need capacity, that's what the bricks are, and we need people to realize we don't know what the rules are going to be. But if you show up with your bricks and you can build with someone else, that's the only skill that matters now. It has nothing to do with the strategy on the board, because the board is gone, the pieces are gone, the clock is gone, all of it. It's about Legos, people. Build stuff.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I will never look at Legos the same way anymore. You've transformed me, at least in that respect. So brilliant. So glad we're able to connect in this, and that your wisdom continues here, for not just for the Episcopal Church in Colorado, but for the wider church. You're a blessing. And one of the reasons I did say, I have heard Screw Tape in the background a little bit during all this. So
let's drive him crazy. Drive Screw Tape crazy.
Let's do it. Let's do it. You do it on your coast. We'll do it over here. We'll fix all the problems in the church. To go from here too, and build something great out of these Legos. So again, thank you for your time and your energy. Blessings to you and your continued ministry.
Blessings to the Episcopal Church out there.